Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my Watch Me Wednesday, episode number 126. Today is going to be a special kind of Watch Me Wednesday. I've decided to periodically do a Q&A of your quilting questions, which means before I do a Watch Me Wednesday, I am going to request that you send me your questions on either a social media post that I have done or via email, etc. beforehand so that I have them so that I can answer your questions when I get to my Watch Me Wednesday. So today I'm going to answer some questions. I've got some really good questions from some viewers of mine. Hey, Carrie, do you like the dress? I love it too. And I have Kyra's question. And I have a few other questions too. So if you want to know the answers to the questions that I have, hit that share button so we can share them with everybody. Hey, Linda. Hey, Laura. And I'm going to get right to it. But I do have, before I get to the questions, I am going to announce 3 winners of my brick by brick pattern from last week's tutorial. So there are 3 people who went to my YouTube channel, subscribed, and commented on the video, and I drew 3 winners for that pattern. So I will need your snail mail addresses. So if you are listening, you can message me your address and I will send you your pattern. If not, I'm going to send you a little note. The first winner is Verna A, and the second winner is Lou Krudewig. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And the third winner is Betsy Cobbs. So you all have won a pattern, the brick by brick pattern from my tutorial last week. And I will get those patterns out to you as soon as possible. Now, let's dive into these questions because I've got a few that I think some of you might find interesting. The first question is from Buffy. Buffy says, my question is, what is my least favorite part of the process of making a quilt? Well, it's funny because I used to dislike label making, but I really enjoy it now because I do it via the embroidery machine. So I really enjoy that. Probably I would say my least favorite part at this point in time is making a sleeve. Every quilt that I make has to have a sleeve on it because they're generally put up for photography, for catalog, or for my patterns, etc. And they need a clean way to hang them. But that's probably my least favorite thing. And it's probably one of the easiest things to do is to put a sleeve on, but it's probably at this point in time one of my least favorite things. I'd be curious what you guys all, or your least favorite things. You should put them in the comments there. My next question is from Kyra, and Kyra is here, and I think it's a great question. She asks, how do you keep your sewn edges of a patchwork block from splitting during quilt assembly after you've trimmed a strip set or square up a block? So, as luck may have it, I have a little 4 patch from one of my tutorials before. And what she's asking is when you've got your block all complete or you've cut a strip set down, there you have the edge of the block here. How do you keep that from the stitches from splitting at the end? So, and this block is one that I actually had to pull at a little bit to kind of get you to see how it splits. So if you have that problem, the reason why, and I teach in classes, is to take your stitch length down to 2.0 is because I think it's a stronger stitch. And that will help when you're cutting those strip sets down or trimming down a block. That will help negate that block from splitting apart. If you keep that default stitch of 2.5, it's definitely a looser stitch, so it's not as strong, and you're going to get that splitting of the seam. And a lot of people will say, well, why don't you backstitch? Well, you can backstitch, but if you're making a strip set, the strip set's long, and you're backstitching at the top and the back, but then you're cutting that seam, you're cutting those subsets, and you're cutting those, and therefore you don't have a back stitch where you've subcut them. And I just see Betsy popped in, and I'm sorry you don't have any power, but I announced you're one of the winners of the brick by brick pattern, Betsy. Woohoo! Yes. So you got one of those brick by brick patterns. So anyway, so that's how I negate that that splitting there. So let's see. What is Carol Lee is saying? Yes, a sleeve is what goes on the back of your quilt to hold a rod so you can hang them for display. Absolutely. And mine get hung for pictures. So that's why I put a sleeve on the back. I have a question here from Denise Mitchell, and she's asking if I ever use a pantograph, and if yes, could I show how to advance it? So the answer is yes. I use pantographs on my long arm all the time. Mine is computerized. But I didn't used to have it computerized way back from 2000 to 2005. And typically you're going to advance it by starting from usually the end of the last set, and you're going to mark that point. Now that's how it is on the computerized version. There's always a point that you will advance from and use that. And typically most machines have like a laser light, so you can see how far you need to go and where that point is. I haven't done it by hand in 15 years because the computer actually does the work, but it's still the same concept. So there is a laser light, and I don't know what kind of machine you have, Denise. So the next question I have is Sharon Durr says, is there a general rule on which way to press your seams when doing quilt blocks? Well, the general rule, most people will say press to the dark side. So, and that's a good general rule of thumb. But sometimes it depends on the block that you're making. Sometimes I press the seams open because it will make the block lay flatter, especially if you have multiple seams coming in. If you have like 6 or 8 seams like in a star that come into the center, I tend to press them open. It just makes it lie flatter. Pressing to the dark side means that you've got one fabric darker than the other, and you're pressing the seams that way so it doesn't show on the lighter side. I tend to press mostly in the way that's going to give me the least amount of bulk, if that makes any sense. And sometimes it is that you're pressing to the dark side. I find now more than not I'm pressing open because I'm doing a lot of more complex blocks. But you know, the one tutorial I did last week, or not last week, the week before, my Rainbows End quilt, the one side of the block, the seams are pressing up, and the other side they're pressing down, so that when you get to the intersection, this way, that they're nesting right there. So, and then I just press to one side here. There's not a lot of seams in that one, so if you want seams to nest, you're going to press in opposite directions. So there's a lot of ways, but the general rule is to the dark side. So Nancy Phillips says, hey Jackie, what weight and type of thread do you prefer when using batiks? Does it differ than when piecing other fabrics? And also, do you need to change the needle more often with batiks? Using a different size needle with batiks, it's all about the batiks. Yeah, it is kind of all about the batiks. So when I'm piecing, I'm typically using a 50 weight thread. I'm using Aurifil. I'm using either the gray, which you see, I've used a lot of that one. This is a full one. This is like a cream color. And I'm using 50 weight. I use 50 weight to piece across the board, whether it's a batik or not a batik. So that answers that question. And I use kind of a neutral thread. Needle size, when I'm using a batik, I like to use a Microtech 7010 needle. Because it has a smaller, it's a smaller needle, so it makes a smaller hole. And actually, I tend to use this more than not on most of my piecing. But If you don't have a Microtex, certainly you can use a universal needle, which is fine too. The Microtex, I think, just leaves a smaller hole. It's a little more precise. And especially if you're paper piecing, it will pierce the paper. It'll give you smaller holes. It'll be easier to separate that paper. And change your needle often, because your needle dulls just like a rotary blade. It's a sharp implement, and it will dull after hitting the fabric, going through that fabric multiple times. It's going to dull. So don't wait to change your needle out. Yeah, change it, definitely. So I hope that answers your question, Nancy. Brenda Bixler asks, could you do a step-by-step video on how you get all your fabrics ready to do your pattern and keep everything organized when doing paper piecing? Do you cut all your pieces and label them with numbers, etc.? I have just gotten into learning paper piecing, and I have really hard time keeping everything all organized and in order before I start actually sewing. So Brenda, wow, yes, I do. I actually have several tutorials on my YouTube channel which are free, and you can watch those. And I also have a fantastic class that goes through step by step everything that you're asking. Everything. It goes in detail. It's called Paper Piecing the Cactus and Blooms online class. And I will put the link above me if you're watching it here on Facebook, below me if you're watching it on YouTube. I will put the link to that class so that you can see all about that. I have lots of people in that class, and they've learned paper piecing from that. And so, but in answer to your question, yes, I show you how to get organized before you start sewing. I show you how to number before you get sewing. I show you how to cut. So yeah, there's definitely a way to do that. So it's awesome. Yep, Laura's in the class. Actually, Laura messaged me yesterday about the class. So she totally organized method to get your paper piecing on straight. So I hope that answered your question. I will put link above me and below me. I have another question here from Melissa Cottrell, and she is asking, what's the best way to get started? Well, find something you love, whether it's a pattern, a fabric, a color, whatever, and just dive in. You can look up tutorials. I have tutorials on my YouTube channel. You can take a class. I have a class that just started. Well, you can start anytime because they're self-paced, but just launched last week. It's my treasure chest class. It's a great beginner class. It teaches you methodology for strip piecing, etc. So it's a fantastic beginner class, and it's only $12, the price of a pattern. So that's a great way to get started. But I always say, find something you love. If you see a pattern out there, if you see something that intrigues you, just do it. And see if you can find a friend or a guild or something that you can get into with, and they will inspire you completely. And that is all I have for questions today. So I'm going to do this kind of format every once in a while, and I will ask for your questions beforehand so that I have them and I'm ready to answer you with samples or what else I might need. So I hope I answered some questions for you. I'd love to see if you have more questions. You can always put them in the comments here. I'd love to see what your least favorite process in making a quilt is. So write it in the comment here, because I bet you Buffy wants to know too. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday. Happy quilting to you all. Love you guys. Bye-bye.